One of the central challenges of studying state development is that it is closely related to many other things. This video illustrates how key global economic and political variables are interrelated and discusses the difficulty of identifying cause and effect in state development. When studying the state, we can see that all good things go together. States that function effectively, whether measured by high World Bank governance scores or low corruption perception scores. These countries also have higher levels of economic development, lower levels of political violence, and are often even more democratic. The combination of rule of law and economic opportunity then produce higher levels of health, education, and other measures of quality of life, like access to clean water. Authors Timothy Besley and Torsten Persson, in their book Pillars of Prosperity, call these relationships development clusters. In development clusters, wealth, capacity, and stability on the one hand, and poverty, corruption, and violence on the other hand, reinforce each other. They create virtuous circles for some countries and vicious cycles for the rest. These gaps between rich and poor in state development and stability are further complicated by regional disparities, with the richest countries of the global north having better governance and quality of life, and the countries of the global south generally facing lower levels of both political and economic development. And the gap between rich and poor has more than tripled in the past 50 years. To identify ways countries can escape the low development trap, it would be helpful to better understand what actually causes it, what causes what. But these factors are so interrelated that this becomes really difficult. For example, as Susan Rose Ackerman and Bonnie Polifka describe in Corruption and Government, high levels of corruption in a country depress its economic output by making it harder to start a business, among other things. Low development then fosters even more corruption, in part because it contributes to keeping salaries for public officials low, just as an example. So how do we start to untangle this web and identify causes? First, while the famous phrase that correlation does not equal causation is true, just because two variables are related to each other doesn't mean that one causes another. It's also true that variables do need to be related to each other for one to cause the other. It is also true that variables need to be related to each other for one of them to cause the other. The readings you'll be doing for your peer discussion both do this. They are focused on establishing new correlations. They go beyond the broad generalizations about relationships between poverty and corruption to identify specific factors that are common to people who work in high corruption versus high capacity bureaucracies. Peter Evans in Embedded Autonomy does this as well, pointing to the importance of strong ties between bureaucrats and firms in countries that promote economic development. The next question we ask about causality is, which came first? Causes have to happen before the things they affect, at least in political science. But this can be difficult in a world where political attitudes and institutions develop very slowly. When two things are happening simultaneously, like corruption and growth, we have a chicken and the egg problem. The authors we read this week and next resolve this problem by something called process tracing, describing the path a country took from a cause, like initial political institutions, to an effect or an outcome, like economic prosperity. By specifying each step the country took along the way, they can start to disentangle the threads of the relationship. Another way to demonstrate what caused what is to run an experiment, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the semester. For now, what we're focused on is identifying the relationship between political institutions, whether they are high capacity or corrupt, and economic development in a variety of forms.